Here we are with Quantum Pop's Glen Quasny, and you just seen opening weekend, The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yes,
How'd you like it?
I really enjoyed it a lot. I was a little afraid, because it's a sequel, and sequels have a tendency to be disappointing on some level. But this one, I was especially concerned because I heard about, oh, there's going to be like three different villains or whatever, and in the past, in the Michael Keaton Batman movies, and in the more recently in never mind. Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans. Introducing a whole bunch of villains in one film has been disastrous. I mean, it's just too much going on. You know, all the different origins and all the different this and that, and they're tripping over each other practically. And I was a little concerned about that. But this movie, they perfected it. They managed to pull it off, and it was interesting because they managed to do three different supervillains, but they all had their own little story arcs, and they were separate in a way, and yet it's like slightly over 2 hours, and yet they managed to get all this in there, and to me, it didn't feel like they were cramming it or speeding things up or whatever. I think one of the brilliant things they did was the character of the Rhino. They really clipped him short in a way, and I don't know if they're going to save him. I think they're saving him for a future movie. They sort of made allusions to that, but they introduced the character, the guy who's going to become the Rhino, early in the film, and then nothing about him while they're focusing on Electro, who's the main villain of this film. So they had this main villain, and most of the time is spent on his origin, his character, his origin, and then why he goes up against Spider-Man. I mean, he starts off being a huge Spider-Man fan, but then when he gains all these powers, suddenly he hates Spider-Man. And so they did some character stuff in the beginning with him. It was a little, that was one of the things where it was a little too goofy. I immediately thought of was it the third Superman movie with Christopher Reeves, where they had Richard Pryor. They had Richard Pryor playing this goofy computer guy, and it was just silly. I mean, it was silly ridiculous, and they kind of did silly ridiculous with the Wayans. I mean, they just made him this like super nerdy guy, and it was a little too much in a way. I mean, they could have been a little subtler with it and stuff. But it were, you get past that in these kind of movies. It's like, if you have to understand that they've got a certain amount of time and they got to get it done. But again, it wasn't too bad. I mean, they did just enough, and they made him connect to the Gwen Stacy character in just like one little scene, and they made him connect to Spider-Man in one little scene. They didn't drag it out in any way like that, and it just moved along. And then, because now everything is CGI and special effects, so people really like that, the thrills of it, the explosions and stuff. They had a lot of that, so in a way the film kind of focuses on that. But underlying it all is all this character stuff, which I love. I love it when they get the characters in there. There's the whole Harry Osborn line going on, sort of in the background. It's just like in the comics. They've done a great job of translating this character from the comics to the film. It's different from the comics. They had to make changes that they needed to make, but they kept the feeling and the style of it. It's like you had the plot. Every comic has a plot where introduce the villain. Villain meets hero. They beat each other up. Then it's that sort of thing. That's what comics were about for a long time. But there was always, especially in the Marvel comics, there was always subplots. There was always little character things going on between the characters, little soap opera moments and things going on that carried over from issue to issue and kind of connected. That was what kept you coming back. It wasn't the battle between the hero and the villain. It was like, oh, Peter Parker's falling in love with Gwen Stacy. I want to see how that's going to work out. So you would come back. And here it's only the second film, and yet they've managed to cover what is like the first 15 years of the comic book in a way. I mean, he graduated high school. The first film he's in high school. This film he's graduating from high school, and well, I don't want to say too much in case you haven't seen the film, but the story arc of Gwen Stacy is moved right along. I mean, in the comics, Gwen Stacy's dad, you know, you get in the comics they did it subtly where you get the feeling that, oh, you know, he's this police detective and he's figured out Peter Parker's Spider-Man. They didn't really come out and say it so much until he dies, you know, and then he kind of looks at him and says, take care of Gwen or whatever. And they did that in the first movie, but they did it in the first movie, you know. They didn't take them years of comics to get to that point. And now in this movie, they go to another place in their relationship that didn't happen for years later after her father died. And so like they're moving the history along, and yet I didn't feel like it. I didn't feel like they're rushing things or anything. I kind of felt like they have their own timeline, and within their timeline it works, you know, and yet they're hitting the key moments, the important moments in the Spider-Man history. They're not ignoring them. I mean, there are things about it that I don't like, things that bother me about it, but I understand why they're doing them. Like every villain is a product of Oscorp. You know, it wasn't like that in the comics, but they've taken Oscorp and they're responsible for everything, including Spider-Man's web shooter, which that bothers me. The formula for the, you know, the webbing, that should have been Peter's. That's his genius. But anyway, I think I talked about that before in another segment of this. But what else do I want to say about this movie? The actors come across. Oh, man, there are character moments in here. I mean, I tell you, you want to laugh, you want to cry. You know, for me, it was a great film. It was a great superhero film. It was a great Spider-Man film. And like I say, it has its flaws. It has its whole plots. But what doesn't, you know, I'm the kind of guy when I approach a film, I'm not looking for little details. You know, I'm not looking for the gotchas. I'm not looking for, oh, look, they screwed this up. I mean, I see them sometimes, but I'm sitting there and I'm going with it. And if they can get me to forget I'm sitting in a theater and that this is really happening, that I'm really into it, if they can get me really involved, that's a successful film. And this film did that for me. It really did. Much more so than other of this type of film I've seen in the past. So, and the fact that it's a sequel and it was this successful to me is just, that is great. That gives me a good feeling about the whole superhero franchises going forward. So that's a little bit about the film for now. I have other things in my head, but I'll save them for another episode.
All right. Thanks a lot, Glenn. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.